Hello, my name's Jordan Matthews and welcome to my video on coaching the back squat. In today's video, we're going to talk about the back squat technical model, an error identification framework, and examples of errors from a skill limitation and a capacity limitation perspective. Before we start back squatting, there's a few things we need to do first. To start with, double check that your workstation is free of obstructions and the equipment you're using is safe to use. After that, we need to set the barbell up at the correct height for the person squatting. So to do this, we want to set the barbell up at a height where if we to loop our hand over the top of the barbell, it should sit in the crease of our armpit. To remove the bar from the rack, we're going to use a mini squat strategy. To do this, grip the bar outside shoulder width and step your chest to the bar. Dip down slightly, squeezing your shoulder blades back and down. This creates a muscly shelf with your traps for the bar to sit on. Take a deep breath, brace your abs, and extend your knees to move the bars off the pins. From there, take 2 positive steps backwards and set up in your preferred squat stance. Squat stance width is highly individual, so I would suggest using an unloaded barbell to explore and investigate which stance works best for you. Not everybody will squat the same due to variations in total standing height, body segment length ratios, hip structure, ankle and hip mobility, and a host of other factors. So as long as they're meeting the points for the right hand side of this video, it is a valid strategy that is safe and effective to use. Those key points are being able to keep your heels glued to the floor for the duration of the squat, being able to get your hip crease lower than the height of your knee in the bottom position in the squat, being able to keep parallel angles between your shin and your torso in the squat, and also aligning the barbell over the midfoot at all times. For most people, squatting with your feet outside of shoulder width and slight external rotation helps them to hit all of the points. Now you've determined your optimal squat stance, we're going to talk about how we descend in the squat. So we're going to take another big deep breath, double check we're braced for our core, unlock our hips and knees, and then slowly descend to the bottom position. Whilst we're descending, we're thinking about trying to drop our hips straight down to the gap in between our knees, as this helps to keep the barbell in the middle of our base of support. Personally, I've found the reach back for the chair cue to lead to too much torso flexion and the bar going too far over the toes. The ankles, knees and hip should all work together to pull the athlete into the bottom position of the squat. Whilst at the bottom position, we're going to have a little pause and get ready to explode viciously upwards to return ourselves to the start position. We should focus on pushing the floor away using the entirety of our foot and not just pushing through our heels, as this again helps to maintain the bar's position and orientation over the midfoot. There should be no movement at the torso during the descent or ascent other than a slight increase in torso angle, which helps to maintain balance as the hips move backwards. Once you've completed the prescribed number of reps within your set, we're going to use the reverse of the process we used to remove the barbell from the rack to put it back on. So take 2 positive steps forward, aligning the barbell directly over the top of the J-hooks. We're going to use the mini squat strategy again to place the bar on the J-hooks. Ideally, we touch the bar to the upright portions of the J-hooks to make sure that we're over the top of it. Please resist the temptation to swing one side on and then the other, as it increases the likelihood you miss, and especially if you're using heavy weights, could increase the likelihood of hurting yourself. Now that we've ticked off the back squat technical model, it's time to talk about the error correction process. I try to use this model from Cushion et al. To speed up the motor learning process and identify errors in the technique of different movement patterns. The first step is to double check the athlete understands what is being asked of them. After all, they can't complete a task if they don't understand what it is. Next, we move down to the skill representation error or skill limitation part of the flow diagram, and we're going to have a look at an example of this now. In this example, we have a female athlete attempting a barbell back squat for the first time. After watching her perform a couple of reps, you can see she's missing some of the points we talked about before. So while she is able to keep her heel glued to the floor, she's lacking the required depth of her hips and you can also see that the barbell is drifting really far in front of her midfoot. Dan John would call this the concertina squat technique. The next step in Cushing's corrective model is to use an implicit cue to help the athlete pay attention to the movement task or goal rather than the body movement themselves. So in the next video, I've asked the athlete to drop straight down like she's about to sit on the world's smallest stool. As you can see from the side by side, this cue is effective because the athlete is in a far better position than she was before. She's opted for a strategy that allows her to drop her hips straight down in between a gap in her knees without us directly telling her to do so. The result is that she's able to get her hip crease below her knees and the barbell stays over her center of mass. This demonstrates that this athlete was experiencing a motor control issue rather than a physical capacity issue such as ankle range of motion. Had the implicit cue not been so effective, the next stage in the model will be to constrain the task so that the athlete organizes naturally into the movement pattern we want to see. So here's an example of an exercise I like to use when that cue hasn't quite done its job. This exercise counterbalances the athlete so they don't have the fear of falling and allows them to sit their hips straight down between their knees, which is what we were looking for to avoid our concertina squat. If none of the implicit cues are working, it's time to move on to explicit tactics. Explicit is making the athlete aware of exactly what we want them to do. So the first thing we're going to do is use an explicit cue such as, I want you to sit your hips straight down between your knees. If that doesn't work, we may want to demonstrate for the athlete or even move them into the correct position. These are the final tactics available in the skill limitation part of the diagram. After explicit cues, we're now starting to suspect there's a musculoskeletal limitation that's hindering the athlete and stopping them from hitting the positions we'd like. So it's at this point we're starting to include some manual muscle testing, range of motion testing in the key joints involved to make sure they aren't limiting the athlete. Having seen the athlete get into really deep hip flexion during the goblet squat, I know this probably isn't causing problems for her. So instead, I'm going to look down the chain at the ankle, which I personally found to be a common cause for mobility issues in the squat. Although the half kneeling knee to wall test is pictured, there has been advances in measuring athlete mobility through the use of turning your phone into a goniometer. The benefit of this is that you can measure the shin angle in this test, but also the shin angle in the squat to see if it really is the ankle mobility that's limiting the back squat. If you find the athlete to have a true mobility deficit, then we need to tailor the expectations of the exercise, as it's unlikely that one session will fix their squat entirely. However, we do also want to continue to load this pattern, so we're going to need to find an alternative that doesn't place ankle dorsiflexion or whatever it is you've found at such a premium. In this particular case, I decided to go for the touch and go box squat. However, this isn't the only exercise you could have chosen. There are literally hundreds of alternatives you could implement based upon your personal preferences and also what you're hoping to achieve from the exercise. In hindsight, I probably would have went with a heavier loaded goblet squat to really mimic the full range of motion I was after in the back squat. Although we've managed to give the athlete a similar stimulus than we originally planned via altering the exercise, we still need to develop the musculoskeletal capacity that is limiting the ability of the athlete to get into the positions we'd like to see in the future. So here's an exercise I would use for improving ankle range of motion. Again, there is literally dozens of variations you could use to do this, and also different modalities such as self-myofascial release and so on. So that is the end of my presentation on the back squat. In this video we've covered the back squat technical model, Cushing's flowchart for error correction, including the differences between a skill and a capacity limited athlete. We've also explored some examples of what this might look like within the back squat moving itself and designed a targeted approach to improve the movement pattern. If you have any other questions, please feel free to get in touch with the email address on the screen now, and thank you very much for watching all the way through this video.